Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cosmic Metamorphosis. My name is Kat. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Before we get into Alex Collier's question and answer webinar from August 19th of this year, I wanted to just go over some stuff with you. So hopefully my soul family here is doing good. Hopefully, of course, yes, things have settled down a little bit for me, but after the next couple of weeks, we'll see how it goes. lots of energies still coming in very strong. I wanted to find out from you guys, basically, if well, let me just say this. I had a really strange sort of astral travel dream or a parallel life dream a few days ago where I was in a medical facility, kind of like a doctor's office, and I was filling out forms. And my mother, who has passed away, she's been gone for 20 years now, was on the other side, basically. She was in basically the waiting room, waiting for me to finish my paperwork so that I could go meet up with her. So I found that very interesting. Yellow Rose for Texas just put out a video. I'll try and remember to put the link in here. She talks about she had a dream. She's the one that talks about people going out either the East Gate, those of us who are going home, or the West Gate, those that are staying behind. And now she's talking about, I guess they've created a middle ground or a middle earth, basically. And this is this is how she sees it: is Trump is setting up those that are left and the West Gate, or this middle ground, I guess. I don't fully know what she's talking about there, but anyways, those who are not going home and staying behind, they will be very well taken care of. That's why Gasara is coming in. That's why they'll have the med beds. They'll have all the money. Like, we won't have to worry about them, basically. But anyway, she talked in her video that she had a dream, basically, that she was in a medical facility or a hospital, and they had actually woken her up, okay? And she was in the real world. So I found that quite interesting that she said she had that dream. And I don't know where else I've heard that from. I don't know if it was from her or somebody else that I've listened to. And they talked about if you're having dreams or these astral travels about being in medical facilities and being woke up, yeah, it's coming. It's coming, guys. We're gonna be woke up fully. Like, none of us is completely woke up, even if you know a whole lot. Okay, so our loved ones are waiting for us. Anyway, I wanted to see if anybody else had that. And then if you do watch Ascension Evolution on YouTube with Joanne Dunn, she did a wonderful video of the 3D to 5D trap. She did a part 1 and part 2, and she basically explained the same thing Alex was talking about. And I haven't admitted in a couple of videos back too, like, I truly believed like we were going to go from 3D to 5D like that and skip over 4D. You know, I just thought we'd have this solar flash and everyone would be like, boom, we're in 5D. And then Alex explained it in a few webinars back about how we have to go through 4D. And of course, it may not take thousands of years. It might take a year or two. You never know. But we're going through this 4D, and I think we're in 4D, as he says right now. It's just we're in this lower 4D, and everything is breaking down. Literally everything around us is breaking down. Okay, people are having issues. They're purging lots of things. They're getting headaches. Sensations in their feet because we're not grounding properly. We can't sleep. at all, or we're just very, very tired. So anyway, Joanne explains her, she used to think of that too. And she thinks, like, she explains how she thinks it's a trap with this new age religion thing. So I commented on her page about that. And I even said in a few webinars back when Alex was talking about this, and I said, it's just like being a diver, like your body physically, when you're in that pressure and you're down deep in the ocean, you have to come up very slowly or you can die. You get the bends, it will kill you. Or if you're climbing mountains, really high, tall mountains, like if you have to go slowly or you get altitude sickness. So I mentioned that in a comment to her. And so in the second video she did, part 2, she picked out just a couple comments and she didn't say our names, but one of mine was the comment that she picked. So I thought that was really cool. So anyway, I'll try and put her link to that video too in here. But anyway, hopefully y'all are doing well. Let's get on with this question and answer from Alex Collier, number 26 from August 19th. I'm sorry I didn't get to do a video last week. I was working. I worked an extra day last week and I just haven't had time. I really need to do the next one from the 26th. So I am running a little bit behind. So I apologize for that, guys. But first question, Gene Decode says the red Draco Queen is still earthbound and shuffling underground between Israel and Vatican City. What are your thoughts? And his answer to that was, I don't agree. And he said it twice. I don't agree. I think Gene Decode, like I used to listen to him a couple years ago. Like he has a lot of good information, but then there's a lot of things I question too. Next question. You remind us we are royal DNA, and my heart, it says, I guess, you remind us that we are royal DNA, and my heart smiles when I hear this. I wonder, is our DNA part of our soul? Does it go with us when we rise to our next dimension? Or is it part of a current human existence and returns to Terra when our soul moves on? And his answer was, okay, that's an interesting question. It says DNA is associated with the creation of physical matter, life. He says a suit, a bodysuit. Says an energy that manifests in the physical. That's where you have DNA. The soul itself imprints the DNA with your essence, who you are. So when you cross over, and whether you move into another dimension or not, your soul has recorded all that you are. It says this would include the DNA that represents the physical form you took in those particular lifetimes. Whether it's human, whether it's off-world, it says whether it's reptilian or aquatic, he says it doesn't matter, all right? All those life forms are created through your process of imprinted your DNA, the DNA of the physical form. It says, see, we manifest the DNA in order so that our soul can take its place, its present in a physical realm. DNA is not the soul. He says, though the soul not only imprints the DNA, it also, he says, your soul also records your experience in specific DNA life forms. He says, I hope that's clearer than mud. He laughs. He says, but you have to remember that DNA is created through intent. He says, through intent, says, through intent, you're, oh my gosh, see, I can't read my writing. What is it, you guys? I write so fast. So what comes first? Okay, so basically he's saying that your intent, it's all about your intent. And so he says, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? He says, well, it's the chicken. Okay, you're the chicken. And he laughs and he says, we're the chickens. He says, let me explain something to y'all. The worship of the isness that Morna shared is profound. It's absolutely profound, because the message is you don't follow anyone. You don't need to follow anyone, because we all have everything we need. We just don't know how to find it. It says, now genuine mentorship, genuine help is not to do it for you, but to show you how to do it for yourself. It says so that once you do it, you not only heal yourself, but you also empower yourself. And by that very act, you become a leader. And when you're a leader, you mirror those behind you, your immediate family, friends, etc. It says your leadership. They in turn feel that energy and hook onto that frequency and become the same thing. When I asked Visayas what's to become of us, his answer was simple: to unconditionally be responsible for ourselves without being coerced by some higher authority. It says you don't even need the crayons for that. He says, so we're going to get there. We're definitely going to get there. But don't move into fear and don't overthink all this other stuff. He says, he says, if the Red Queen was here, she'd be fucking dead already. He says, do you understand? And if she's alive, she's not here, meaning here on this planet. He says, I know, I hear the chatter, I get people that I talk to, and there's a lot of stuff out there. There is a lot of stuff. What do you feel? Okay? This is really important. What do you feel? If you're going to go and download all this knowledge, all this information that's out there, and I mean, it's all over the place. He says, you're going to do this. If you're going to do this, you have to pay attention to your gut check. Your gut check. What's your gut telling you? How do you feel about it? I want to remind you that most of you, if not all of you, have come back in time to right a terrible wrong, which means you've already accomplished this mission, this life, and you've come back to assist again because something didn't go right the first time. So you already know this. You already have experience. Your soul knows this and your body knows this. The body doesn't lie. Only the mind does. So listen to your body. It says listen to your heart. Don't get bogged down by all this fucking bullshit, he says. Because guys, he says, you didn't come back here to get bogged down by all this nonsense, okay? You didn't. Sometimes too much information doesn't help because it clouds the issue. And then you overthink it. And then you mind fuck yourself. He says, so you take yourself down the rabbit holes and then you get all stressed out. And then your body is like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed. And I can't take it. I get all confused. He says, I don't know what's going on. That's what, brain overload, when there's too much information, you don't know what to think, but definitely check your gut, check your instincts, because it will tell you. It says, don't do that to yourselves. He says, it's a waste of energy and it's a waste of your time. And I sincerely mean that. And those of us who are vintage, says, ladies and gentlemen, Time flows through our hands like water. It just does. So we have to be mindful on where we focus our energy. Are we focusing our energy on ourselves? Are we focusing our energy on solving the issue today with the world? Or are we going down these rabbit holes saying who's right and who's wrong? It says you already know. You just don't believe it. But you do, he said, already know. You have more than you know. He said that twice. More than you know. It's all on the inside. It's all on the inside. Okay, knights, he says. It's like I've said in the past videos of mine, we are coming out of the age of Pisces, which was the age of belief. That's why you saw in every store, on every shirt, it was like believe, I believe, believe. You know, everything was about belief. The age we're coming into of Aquarius is the age of knowing. You will know, not just believe something somebody told you. You will know from your soul, from your essence. Okay. Next question. 107 did an interview regarding Nasara Gassara and crypto. Crypto is a scam. I don't think that's entirely accurate, especially seeing the interview with Jimmy and Joanne's 2622 BitChute and following Goldilocks great insights, plus the money moving away from fiat, gold-backed thoughts. So that was kind of a skew question. It didn't make too much sense, but basically they're asking Alex what he thought of all that. And he says, okay, he says, I didn't get a lot of that. He says, you kept cutting out. So yeah, that was a question. Like JP kept cutting out when he was saying the question. But he says, but as far as cryptos, he says, as far as the changing of the monetary system, the current system we have is completely broken, and it was designed to enslave. You don't need crayons for that either, he says. Okay, he says, it was designed to enslave, and that's exactly what it's done. He says, now, as far as cryptos, some element of cryptos is real. You know it is going to be 75, 100. He said different coins. He says, probably not. He says, will they be asset backed? Those that survive will be. Says those that make the cut will be real money or have the definition of real money. Says they will be asset backed by something. Okay. So we've done the fiat thing. It is a disaster. He says now regarding the financial system, obviously it's changing. Wells Fargo just finished training most of their managers and supervisors and executives for 6 months. They've been in training. He says, my own guy here, he says, was gone for 6 months, and that's where he was. He says, because we've chatted about it, and he was surprised that I knew. He says, now, according to Jim Willie of Hattrick, he says, and I followed Jim Willie for 10 years, and he's been profoundly accurate. Says Wells, Citibank, Sachs, Goldman, Chase, B of A, and BlackRock are all in bankruptcy right now. Said Bank of America has been in bankruptcy since March. All of this has to do with derivatives. Says which we've been warned about for years. He says, well, it's here. Okay. Says if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, says, well, we're really living it now. Says this isn't just isolated to the real estate market. This is everything. This is the entire global financial system. Says is now dealing with this issue. He says now BlackRock, along with Vanguard, owned by the elites, they have assets of 12 trillion. BlackRock does. Says so it's interesting they're in bankruptcy. I wonder why. But you see, the entire financial system was a fraud. So if you're going to another system, they can't just skip over it. He says, you see, it's all paper. It's all paper, he says. And what they have, they probably can't even prove they own. He says, for example, just go back to the real estate crisis. Back in 2008, 2009, he said no one knew where the actual mortgages were. Not even those who actually owned the mortgages. Nobody knew where the titles to the properties were because they kept selling the damn things over and over and over again just to make money, to put it on their books so that they could go out and create wealth, which they then took out of the banks as profit, as bonuses. They basically robbed the system, okay? And when the whole thing collapsed, they dumped it on us. They dumped it on us. We the people. That kind of sounds what I'm going through with my mortgage, Veterans United. Not finding my original paperwork, okay? Somehow they say they received it, but they can't find it. So now I'm having to do new paperwork through loss mitigation, which technically, like, it's not that I can't pay my mortgage. I'm willing to pay my mortgage. It's just they dropped the ball and never rolled my forbearance amount back into my loan like they promised they would do. So now I'm getting screwed. So now I have to send them all kinds of new paperwork. We'll see how this turns out because it's all a fucking scam. Like, how can nobody knows? They probably don't even have my freaking title to my house either. God only knows where that is. So he says that isn't going to happen again. He says that's not going to happen again because we're moving in a different direction. He says now we're not just advancing physically, we are growing and expanding spiritually first. And that means you don't just do this shit. You don't live this way. He says your priorities are completely different than just surviving a physical realm. Hi, Amber. He says the importance of evolving spiritually means that you are not only creating a world that is comfortable and expanding, but a world of love and a world of integrity, of honor, where you become authentic. And being authentic, he says, you walk your talk. And in order to walk one's talk, we all have to clean up our shit. But once you clean it up, it's gone. It's behind you. All right? There's nothing encompassing you at all. Nothing. It says, yeah, everything's changing and it's gonna be for the better. It really is. It says it's gonna be for the better and it's moving slower than most of us wanted, but it is what it is. It says, but we're gonna get there. It says, I mean, you can see the progression already. Soon the banks are going to announce they're no longer going to be funding mortgages. It says that's coming. That entire system will be moving into the blockchain arena, which is the QFS. And which is interesting because I just saw a post on Telegram that the Bank of England says that they're no longer, I guess they're no longer using or accepting the 20 pound and the 50 pound bill. Whoa. Okay, that's something serious. Interesting. He says the banks themselves will not be doing it because they've proven themselves not to be trusted with this stuff. He says, okay, and this goes back to what I've been saying about the Orion Aldebaran group. What happens is this altruistic, but they go back to old programming. If my wording's a little off, it's because he like stops and he pauses and he changes his wording. So I'm just writing what he's saying. So sometimes it's a little off. So he says, what happens is they're altruistic, but they go back to old programming. So if you take those opportunities away from them, it says when they flip back to the old programming, he says there's nothing there for them to do. They can't screw you over because there's nothing there. They can't do it because all that authority and processes have been removed from them. So things are changing. There's still a lot that we don't know. There's very specific reasons for not sharing everything just yet. It says, first the war has to be over, and it isn't. Says it's not over just yet. There's still a move or two to be played, unfortunately. But don't get discouraged. He says, I know how hard it is. Oh my God. He says, I do know how hard it is. He says, I go to the grocery store, I buy gas, even dog food. He says, my electric bill has gone up 70%. And he says, of course, they put in smart meters, he says, in the entire complex. They warned us about a price rise, he says, but they actually didn't change it. But suddenly they put in the smart meter and now everybody's using more juice, apparently. Yeah. He says, but of course, we had no decision in that because we're renters. He says, so, he says, I get it. He says, I get it. It costs 40% more to live. And if you live in the US, he says, that new bill, that anti-inflation bill, well, the entire middle class gets a 40% income tax raise. He says these people never learn. They just never learn. He says they think they can just keep talking, or taking, and taking. He says, and that's why the entire system is crumbling, and it is crumbling. Says, look, I've talked since we've been doing these webinars about silver. You're running out of time. He says, in fact, there are many silver experts who are saying that in the next 3 to 4 months, there will be no product to buy. He says, now, I'm not a metals expert. I don't have a license to do any of this, but I know some things, just like you do. He says, you've experienced life. You need to figure it out. You really do. Said the banks have been buying back all their long and short-term options on silver. Said they've been buying them back so that they can go to the COMEX and take possession of the physical metal, okay? And cause the reason, and because the reason they're doing that is because they're scared shitless, he says, about what's coming, the transition. So that shows they themselves are not clear about the transition from the fiat system we live in, and we have been for 100+ years, into the quantum system. It says there's information that's been withheld from the banks as well, and I'm sure there's a reason for that, because they're not sure, or they're not to be trusted. I hate banks. I hate banks. I hate medical places and hospitals. I hate courthouses and attorneys and like most of them. Like this, yes, there are good people in there, but a lot of them are crooked and corrupt. All they want is money. He says, so they're scared. They want to survive. So they're buying back all their put options, short options on the metals so that they can get the product from the COMEX. Once that product's gone, it's empty. There isn't product. You can do your own research on this. He says Jim Willey's a very, very good source. He goes on tangents, but he eventually gets back to the real heart of the information. So just bear with him on that. Okay, next question. That was a long-winded one. He kind of went all over the place on that. But next question. Planet Terra has a consciousness. Does she also have a soul? What is the Andromedan's perspective on this? Do the Andromedan motherships have a soul? Thank you. Alex says, planets do. Yes. So do suns. So do stars. They are living consciousness. The A's mothership, no. He says it is organic, but the consciousness that it holds is the members of the crew. He says that's my understanding of what it is. It is not a separate consciousness. They do use limited AI to manage very specific functions on the craft. It doesn't make any decisions for anybody, but what it maintains is environmental and mechanical issues of the starships. It says the whole itself is organic. It is self-repairing based on the AI system, okay? It says, but the consciousness that each ship holds is that of the crew. That's a good question. He said, no one's ever asked me that in all these years. In all these years. I think someone's asked, or he's explained part of how the ships are organic and stuff. Maybe not that specific question if they have a soul, though. Next question. I have 2 questions, this person says. There are floods going on all over the world right now. And in my hometown in New Mexico, recently burned. He says it seems far too many everywhere. Any idea on what this is about? It is really devastating the communities, emanating water, etc. Second question, can you speak more to the regressive walk-ins comment you made a few months ago saying it was beginning to be a problem? Alex says, okay, well, let's deal with the weather. He says, the weather's weird, and I'm not quite sure, frankly, if it's manipulated. And I think I talked about in my last video, like we were getting thunderstorms every evening for like a week straight. It was the weirdest thing. We've lived here for 12 years, and I've never seen such a thing. Never. So it's really interesting. And he says, or if it's Earth's ecosystem adjusting to new frequencies. He says there's a lot of energy hitting us from our sun. And as I told you a couple months ago, the sun is going through a helium conversion. That changes frequency. That also changes the makeup of the sun, and the planets will adjust and are in fact adjusting to that. He says, so I do not know if that's what the Earth is doing, and she is responding in such ways. He says, you know, when I hear about areas being flooded, the first thing I think of sometimes is that all that water is going somewhere underground. He says, it's flooding tunnels. I don't know that that's true either, but we do know that some of that does in fact happen, and that does a great deal of flushing out shit. He says, or is it weather war? He says, I don't know. I don't have those answers. I see the same thing. He says, you know, the weather here in Colorado has been hotter than I think it's ever been for the longest period of time. He says, we've had some thunderstorms, incredible thunderstorms. See, thunderstorms, yes, here as well. He says, we're in an hour, 2 to 2.5 inches of water comes down. He says it snowed 2 days ago up in the mountains. Okay, and this was July 29th in Estes Park. It had a foot of hail. He says they had to bring out snowplows to clear the streets. July 29th. He says, so it's just weird. It's just weird. Next question. I don't think he answered the second question part of that question, did he? No, he didn't. Next question. You made a further question. Seeing that part, I didn't quite understand from JP. Sometimes JP mumbles and I don't quite get everything he's saying. So something about Dr. Sala. I'd really like to know your opinion. The Planetary Corporation, ICC, he says Dark Fleet have had much success in trading biologicals to other races for technology. How will human trafficking ever end on Earth if the Imperial fleet is having so much business success in space? And Alex says, I believe that the plan to destroy that business model is to implode their density. That's the goal, is to implode their density in this area of our galaxy. And what that means is, as a bandwidth of frequency, it collapses. So where we start is 4D and then 5D. Now this not only eliminates that model, he says it also eliminates dark attachments, which he's mentioned before in previous webinars. Satanic, dark, spiritual attachments in lower fourth. He says it will eliminate virtually all of that because they're feeding off the third density. You see, it says they're feeding off of us, our emotions and our blood and everything else. It says it solves a whole lot of problems by eliminating third density, having it collapse itself. Very interesting, huh? Yes. It says there's no food source, nothing. He says it's now a void. And if you collapse their density, that entire consciousness is gone. It says it no longer exists. It says it's like God taking an eraser, swoosh. It says all done. And he laughs. And he says all done. He says, and all those broken pieces go straight to source. They go straight to source where they get reset. He says they get their tune-up. He says they have their oh fuck moment, and we get to continue to move on and fulfill our purpose and our mission. He says that's how I see it. And that's what I'm sticking to, because that's what the A's told me is going to happen. Nearly 50 years ago, he was told this. Interesting, huh? Third density collapsing. Yeah. Let's go. Okay, next question. So Elena was in the chat again. And then Dan Willis, if you don't know who Dan Willis is, he's in exopolitics. So he actually asked Alex a question. So Dan asked, have the A's told you how they use crystal technology? Are they used in the med beds and for Frill? JP says maybe he meant Vril. Generation, he says, when the medbeds camera captures holographic past, going back to your conception, is this stored time element of previous patterns over your lifetime that can be a record stored inside a crystal to age regress you by recalling these earlier holographic patterns that are stored from your DNA within a crystal. That was a long one. Alex says, hi, Dan. Nice to meet you. He says, number one, they don't call it a crystal medbed, all right? He says, they've always presented it to me as a holographic camera. He says, now, yes, there is a platform, and yes, there is, you would lay in this type of bed. He says, it almost looks like a bathtub. But they're extremely much bigger and wider because it has to fit different size physical forms of ETs. And there is, it looks like a light, he says, and it sits over the top and it can move over the platform. All right. It says, and there are things on the walls, monitors. And when they turn this thing on, the monitors go on. Now when it's off, you're just looking at a wall. He says, so when it's off, you're just looking at a wall, and you would not know ever that there were monitors there or equipment. But when they flip this thing on, and there's like a whistle, he says, and then it's on. And then all the monitors come up, and this camera comes up over. And what's interesting is that it's reading the physical body and past lives and your physical existence from conception in real time. It says it sees it all. And they can go to the monitors and pull specific things like a slide. He says it literally manifests a slide. He says, now, is it crystal? He says, Dan, I don't know. Is it silicone? I don't know. I was watching this happen from another room. I wasn't in the room, and I didn't physically handle the slide. He says, this is the same experience I had when I was 8, except for me, because I'm human, they put this little metal, he calls it a yarmulke. He says it looked like a yarmulke on my head. And when they did that, there was the whistle. He says, that's when the monitors came out of the walls. He says, okay. And then I started seeing all of these different things going on, these different past lives. He says, now, Mornay's version on a ship, he says, it didn't have the thing on top of it that was moving back and forth. He says, this was just the device on my head. So maybe it's like the mobile version. Okay. He says, this particular holographic camera. But it did exactly the same thing. But maybe it wasn't as in depth, but it did the same thing. He says, how much crystal is in it? He says, Dan, I don't know. I would think if there is crystal in it, they grow them themselves. And they would grow it themselves because it would have a very specific purpose. It says, I know that ancient races used a great deal of crystal. He says, not only for technology, but also for lasers, for seeing into the past or seeing into the future. There's so many properties about crystals we don't know anything about. He says, we're still a babe in the woods, right? He says, so, and do you ever notice, I think I've mentioned this before, if you own stones or crystals, have you noticed over the years, they change color? They do. They're living, just like us. They change colors. I have several stones that have changed colors. Maybe slightly ever so, but they do. They change. He says, so I know Fred Bell was very interested with a lot of that technology because I've heard Sean Morton talk about it. He says, I met Fred years and years ago on the Dog and Pony Show, the shows they had way back in the 90s. He says, so I don't know how to answer your question, Dan, because I don't know. He says, it's a great question, though. He says, I appreciate you asking it, and I'm glad you're here on the chat meeting everybody. If anyone has a copy of Defending Sacred Ground, if you can go to alexcollier.org and go to books, you can download it for free. He says, okay, it's there. You can put it on a stick, go to Office Max, Office Depot, or your local printer and print it out in black and white. Have it bound, and you have your own copy. He says, might cost you $10. He says, I don't know. Or your own printer. He says, you just have to have it bound. It's just a couple 100 pages. Okay. Next question. Someone says, you really burnt the tires last week and did a wonderful job breaking down specific factions of the cabal, starting with the SES and its connection to the London Bank. Can you please describe the Khazarian mafia in detail and its connection to the Bolsheviks and modern-day Ukraine? Alex says, whoosh. Says, there's going to be a lot of smoke here. He says, a lot of burning rubber. He says, I know I learned a long time ago not to paint a target on yourself. And he laughs and he says, and the only way to answer your question is to paint a target on myself. But here it goes. It says, let's go back to the Old Testament and let's go back to the wanderings in the desert and Jehovah. So let's go back to that time. And I've touched on this in the Old Testament. It says they wandered in the desert for 40 years. It says, I want you to know it was more like 400 years. And the purpose to do that was to not only train, but to eliminate generations of thinking and to retrain some of those now. When Moab Sesostris, if you take the first two letters of that name and you put it together, it's Moses. When he died of radiation poisoning, he had to be replaced. He says another took his place, which is why when he came down off that hill or that mountain, not only was he taller, but he was wearing a mask, which is why they say he had a glow about him. In some of the old ancient Hebrew, though the Torahs say he was wearing a mask, the face of God, the light of God, says, well, he was wearing a mask, and that's because it wasn't Moses. It was not the human being that went up that hill. Isn't that interesting? I have never heard that one before. It says that was the beginning of the training of the Khazarian mafia. That's where it started. That's where the psychology came from. He says, now, who was Jehovah? Said it worked for Enlil. Anunnaki. Enlil made sure that this process began so that humanity would become totally corrupted and dark because he did not approve of his brother, Enki, sharing the Anunnaki bloodline with us. Remember, we were supposed to be slaves, okay? The original versions were slaves. They were created to work the mines so that the other Anunnaki princes, etc., wouldn't rebel and wouldn't have to go into the mines and dig out the gold themselves. They felt they were better than this. It says Enlil did this to sabotage humanity. He did it to sabotage humanity. So spiritually, we would not evolve, that we would get caught in the crossfire, he says, of this fucking dark shit. He says, to go any further than this would paint a target on me, bigger than me. He says, larger than me. He says, maybe it's time to say all this. He says, I don't know. Kind of shook his head, and he says, but the Khazarians became the hybrids, and then they infiltrated everything with their insanity. Everything. So they infiltrated humanity. Now you have to remember there was a time where we were becoming like them, like the Anunnaki. We could do the same things. We were building our own spacecraft. We were building mavadas, flying carpets, which were platforms on magnetic fields, okay? And the reason they called them flying carpets is because the platforms themselves were made of wood, and they would throw a rug over it to make it more comfortable. And the rod of God was used to fly these things, the staff of Noah. Okay. They were very commonplace. And then somewhere, he says, and then there's somewhere, those have been stacked up. He says there's definitely somewhere. He says we were becoming like them and they freaked. Says there's a lot still to come out. There's a lot of human earth history to come out, and there's a lot of people who haven't come forth yet with their pieces of the puzzle. He says the ivory, which later became the Hebrew, says they were gypsies. They were extremely resourceful, They weren't evil. They were just trying to survive. He says that made them easy prey for Jehovah. And at some point, they created within their ranks their elite bloodline of hybrids, and they hid. They hid amongst this population of gypsies of Ivory. He says, now the word Jew didn't come around until the 19th century. It was never used prior to that, just for the record, okay? So when you see that in the Bible, that was added. He says that was not originally who they were or what they were called. He says, and I've been saying this for years. Been a lot of mistranslations and a lot of altercations to all the books. To all the books. It says the books of the Apocrypha. The books of the Apocrypha are a hell of a lot more accurate than anything we've been given today. Says, so that's why sometimes you have to go old school. You just have to go old school. He says, okay, I don't want to go any further with this question. You get the gist, right? When he says that, I watch, there's a channel that I watch, Bros of DK on YouTube, and I love it because they go exploring abandoned like castles and homes and like all over Europe. And they did some in the United States this past year. But they're really good, and they go through, and it's amazing. It is amazing, people. You should go. You should watch them. Oh my gosh. There's a lot of urban exploration channels on YouTube, but they're very respectful, and they go through and they show everything. It's amazing to me the things that these people leave behind in these mansions. And when they show these libraries that are full of books or like all these paintings, I'm just thinking to myself, oh my God, some of our true history are in those old books, probably sitting there in these homes. And oh my gosh, we need these books and that artwork and all that. Like, it would be amazing to just go in there and like have a company to go in and take all these antique furnitures and like refurnish them and resell them, or at least like the families. It just amazes me that the families back there don't want to bother. They just leave everything behind, their shampoo, their toothbrushes, like everything. They just up and disappear. They just leave. It just amazes me, like, why here in America, most families, when something happens to their parents or whatever, they go in, they take over the house, either they sell it, they go through, they clean it, they keep certain things. Like, apparently they don't do that in Europe, or the rich ones don't, because they have enough money, they just don't care. It's just amazing the things they leave behind. But anyway, that just reminded me of that. Sorry. He says, you get the gist of what I'm trying to say here. If you want to know, you can research it. But all the Khazarians haven't been round up yet. And yeah, he says, they scare the shit out of me because they're insane. He says, they're insane. Next question. I have heard Dr. Sala's interview with Sarah Bressman Cosme on insights of our Atlantis and Lemuria. There's a lot of us here to heed the memories of that time. Is this part of your understanding? And Alex says, yes. Many of us are here from both Lemuria and Atlantis. He says, yes, we are. He says, and that's because we're explorers. Many of us are explorers. Many of us have done a great deal of travel in many different galaxies. Yeah, yes, I know I have. We have been in many different physical forms. We have experienced all kinds of tyranny. He says, so we have a great deal of experience. Many of us were Black Leaguers who were the resistance, and we have a passion, a very deep, deep, passionate streak in us that would do anything and everything to oppose tyranny. And that's why we volunteered for this, because this is a very old and ancient tyranny and matrix, he says, and it's time for it to go away. Yes, it really is time for it to go away.
says, so we volunteered, we reincarnate to walk in, to reincarnate into this race. He says, this genetic royal race that everybody looked past in order to shift the consciousness and physicality of at least 22. He says, and I've heard Elena and her people say it's now 24 races. And I wish I had a rubber band, he says. He says, what we're doing here, he says, it's like a rubber band. He says, here's the one end, and this is the present moment. And you pull it back, and you pull it back as far as you can. And when you let go, all the knowledge, all the energy, all the consciousness, when you let it go, at this end, he says it builds up velocity, and when it hits this point, you'll let it go. He says, pow, and it's off. He says it's just rocketed to a whole new level. That's what we're doing. He says that's the best example I can give you of the energy that is building here. Makes sense. Says of the consciousness, compassion, of righteousness, of freedom. And it's that movement of intent that's literally going to ricochet us into fourth and set the stage for fifth. It says now, all of this is being coordinated with the movement and the actions of the universe itself. There's a coordination here. It says, which is why we have sixth and seventh dimensional beings assisting with the mentoring and the coordinated moves of what's happening here now. This is why you have 9th, 10th, 11th density beings incarnated into our race and in other lower dimensions as well. It's why everyone is here, because this is a really big deal. The entire galaxy, and I've said this before, it's not only us, it's the entire galaxy. And he just said this. The entire galaxy moves into a completely different level of frequency. When the Orion AI et al. Is gone, when it's gone, and it's gonna be gone, says it is. Its time has come. It's over. So you can understand why they're fighting so hard to survive, because there's nothing for them. It ends for them. They think it's just darkness. That's all they can see because of their mindset, their consciousness. It's all just darkness for them because they have ignored and denied source for so long that they just can't go there. He says, but luckily for them, source doesn't kill itself. It doesn't commit suicide, which is why third density implodes. They will go back to source. And that's their oh shit moment, in my opinion. It's long overdue. Long, long overdue. He says, but that's what I was shown years ago. That's what's happening here. And that's why it's so important that we, as light, not just humans, but others that have been through this Orion AI matrix draconian nightmare, says that when that is all gone, when it all implodes into zero, into nothing, which is that must be our 0 point, that all of us who've had these experiences, whether it's Earth or all the other planetary civilizations, that we fill that void in lower fourth density with our light, so that our healing can commence and happen as quickly and as rapidly as possible. He says, so I believe we've been getting a lot of coaching on that. Those of us at night are out of our bodies and in our travels. Says many people still going to the ships. We're getting all this information. We're just not bringing it back with us because we're still dealing with these assholes here in the physical realm. Yeah, that's why I can't remember.
I've had so many dreams. I've been like on these ships or in classrooms and learning stuff, but I can't remember what it is.
Next question. It seems they are working quickly on installing 5G transmitters everywhere for the demise of the schools to begin with, but everywhere eventually and soon. Is this something our off-world friends can help with to intercept and shut down the damaging frequency and microwaves? Our children are being targeted at every level, and they will be the first to get really sick with this horrific setup. And Alex says, I'm not holding that dark scenario myself. Says there's already so many screwed over by the vax. They're going that are going to be harmed and have been. But I think it ends there. I do believe it ends there. He says, I wish I knew everything, but I don't. But I think we're very, very close to checkmate against the dark side. He says, I do. I really believe we're very, very close to checkmate. He says, now, Rob Mercury, the remote viewer, and this is already past, so nothing that I know of happened anyway, but he says, Rob Mercury, the remote viewer, and I've never heard of this person, says September 3rd. He's pretty firm that September 3rd is the checkmate day. I don't know, he says, but that's what he thinks. And he's a very interesting fellow. I don't know that you could put a date to it. He says the Patriot Intelligence Report, which I'm thinking he might have meant like the X-22 report, maybe. I tried to find it, I couldn't find it. Which is on Rumble, says from dated 8/17/22, did a show. And this is really interesting because I never thought of this scenario ever. And man, when I tell you this, if you haven't heard about this, this is totally possible. Okay, totally possible. It says so. The Patriot Intelligence Report on 8/17/22 did a show, so you can research this yourself. He thinks that the deep state is going to arrest Trump, and when that happens, he's going to ask for a military tribunal. And the military's going to immediately say, okay, fine, because he has the right as a former commander in chief. And maybe still commander in chief, which of course he is. We all know he is, right? Yeah. Because the nuclear football is following him, and the military will take him into custody and isolate him. What did the keyboard say? He will be insulated. Yeah. And all the evidence that they already have, and the evidence that will be presented by Trump's side of the equation, will cause the military to move in a very concerted, concentrated effort to shut this shit down once and for all. It says, and the tribunal will be in weeks. It'll move very quickly because they already know. They already got a great deal of evidence already. It's a very interesting scenario, but that puts everything in the forefront. It puts it all in the forefront. It'll all be televised. He completely bypasses the corrupt judicial system. Man, it's corrupt in my little town. I swear, I know they paid off people with money in this town. Whenever they have someone take them to court, they pay them off. Yes, they do. It's everywhere. So he says by doing this, he will completely bypass the corrupt judicial system, the corrupt FBI, all of DC, and all their shit. It bypasses all of that, and it puts it all at this level in front of everybody, which is why the Q team has explained from the very beginning, military's the only way. Because they've already looked at this. They've probably war gamed this with computers, and this is the scenario that plays out. And maybe that ties into what Rob Mercury has seen as September 3rd. I don't know. He says, it's interesting. It's really interesting to see all of this manifest. And then there's people saying, No way will they arrest Trump. I don't know, he says, but something's going to happen. What does the cue board say if you follow it? The first arrest will shock the world. And for them to arrest Trump would shock the world. I think it's coming. I'm getting goosebumps, and that usually means like it's correct. He says something's going to manifest the last move, the checkmate. And he just shakes his head and he laughs and he says, the A's haven't told me. They haven't told me because if they had, I would tell you. But then the deep state would know. He says, right? He says, and we don't want them to know shit. We don't. He says, I just know we're going to be okay. He says, but it's going to be a rough ride. And it's been so far. But this has to play itself out. Because what we're dealing with now are hybrid humans and human occult dark human beings. And well, the world itself, he says, needs an enema. He says it really does. It needs an enema. It needs to be flushed of this darkness. And it's coming. It's definitely coming. He says you can see it. You can feel it. He says if you're paying attention, you can definitely feel something's coming. Some big move is coming. And if you're really paying attention, you can see it. He says you can see the pieces falling into place. And if you've watched the deep state, he says, if you've watched the dark matrix, you can tell they're desperate and they're freaking out. They're really freaking out because they've lost control. And the reason they've lost control is because the ET's handlers, he says, their backups, they're not here to protect them any longer. He says they've been adiosed. I can definitely see that scenario. I feel it. Wow, I feel it. It's coming. So next question. Farming technology. Oh, there was a question about basically farming technology, and then he's answered this before previously, and he says basically in every town, in every city, there's lots of golf courses. So using your local golf courses, he says we can use those golf courses as like farming fields to grow our foods. He says using local manure. He says the water's already there, which yeah, they have a sprinkler system, so the water is already there in these golf courses. He says the irrigation system is already there. And then the community, people who live there, can just tend to it. He says we start growing our food as quickly as possible. And in colder places, we need to start building greenhouses. He says, because this could be a difficult winter. He says National Guard definitely has food storage. He says corporations all have food storage. He says Walmarts all have food storage. And I said many videos ago when I went to my local Walmart many months ago, they had those huge shipping containers out in their parking lot. There must have been 50 of them at least. And I'm like, what the hell are all these containers doing here? And you go inside our Walmart, like it's completely packed, like packed to the brim. But the only thing they don't have of is like, apparently from what I want, like pet food. I couldn't find freaking pet food for the life of me. Pet food is so hard to find. And I know I've had people say, oh, you can make your own. Yes, I could. And I know how to make my own. But the fact is, I have picky cats. And I have weird cats. I think they're alien cats. And they won't eat chicken. I used to have a couple cats, my last two that passed away, they would eat meat. They would eat meat. These cats I have now, they don't eat chicken. The only meat they eat is fish, which I guess it's lucky we live near rivers. So, like, yeah, if I had to, I could go fish and cook them fish. But they're fishy cats, so I can't make them any kind of meat. They don't really eat cheese. They don't like milk. Like they're very picky. So there's very specific cat foods that I get them, and they will only eat those kind. So when I can't find them anywhere, like I think half of the foods I used to eat, like I just can't find them anymore. So it's kind of interesting. Um, Next question. Why hasn't a planet been able to ascend with its people before? Why are we the first ones? And Alex says, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer. He says, I've contemplated that for 35 years, and I have to tell you, seriously, I've asked that question 10, 12 times. And when I ask that question, Mornay will deflect it and go into a whole nother conversation with me. And when I try to bring it back, he will do that as well. He will deflect that question into another conversation. And the last time I asked it, he just simply looked at me, smiled, and said, it isn't time for that answer. He says, guys, he says it isn't time for that answer. And yet, that's exactly where we're all going. So I'm wondering if we're meant to come to that answer ourselves, individually, and then collectively come to that answer ourselves. Maybe that's why there's such a unique and diverse collection of soul groups from all the known dimensions in our holographic universe here at this time. Maybe we're the first meant to do it. He says, maybe there's a part of me that totally resonates. He says, yeah, that he was thinking about it. He's like, yeah, that totally resonates with me. He says, on a soul level. He says, I absolutely resonate with that. That makes sense to me. That's why we're all here from all these different places, with all these different experiences, with all this different knowledge. He says, but when I go into my head, I get confused because my head's not that smart. He says, it has knowledge, but it doesn't have soul experience. He says, I don't know how else to explain it. Next question. With the planet being a living biosphere, and it vibrates with energy, which I wonder if the crystal structure within the planet has a connection to this. Why is gold always found next to quartz? And what is the connection, maybe? And Alex's answer was, he says, that's interesting. He says, my understanding is that the reason gold forms near quartz is that gold is captured light from stars that have gone nova. He says it's captured light. And he smiles really big and he kind of just thinks about it. And he says, crystals capture light. It is light, solidified light. We are made of stars. He said, so I have gave you something to research. We are gold. We are stars, dust. We are the dust. Just like his dark materials, the dust. The dust goes through everything of consciousness, right? Next question. My question is regarding all the UFO activity we've been seeing. I've looked at them numerous times through infrared binoculars, as you suggested. I'm wondering, how do we know if this is benevolent ET activity and not visuals from within Terra, such as Dark Fleet or our own space program showing themselves to prepare ourselves for a fake invasion? I'm not sure if it's a viable question, but I keep wondering. Penny, for your thoughts. And Alex says, no, it's a good question. He says, it's a really good question. He said, you should assume that it's either our Space Force, ourselves, and our benevolent. He says, the Dark Fleet is either on board or has gone to the light, or they're at the bottom of the ocean feeding sharks and other things. He says, you follow me? Our atmosphere, the area around Earth, is locked down. says, I do not see a fake alien invasion happening at all. I just don't see it. He says, there's literally no reason to do such a move. And there is a lot of talk about a solar flare, something that would harm the Earth or harm humanity because of a solar flare. He says, that's not my lane or material, and I'm just making you aware of that chatter that's out there. He said, should there be something, he says, a flare, a hot, very hot helium coming off of our sun, because it is going through a conversion, as I said earlier. Ships could very easily park themselves between us and the sun and redirect that energy. In fact, you may have seen a test of that just a few days ago. And I don't know who the woman's name is, but it was posted as she was able to capture a very significant event that was taking place between us and the sun. I do believe that's Gina Marie Colvin Hill. She's very unique herself, but she has all kinds of those videos of plasma beings and things from the sun and ships and everything. So he says she was able to capture a very significant event that was taking place between us and the sun. So it could be that they're running maneuvers to do something like that. He says, but instead of focusing our consciousness on anything like that, he says we really, really should be focusing our consciousness on here and now. He says where we are in the present moment and focus on controlling the things that I can control, which is how we think, what we want, and where we put our own energy. In other words, on being present on the here and now and focusing on what it is that we need to do to protect ourselves, to have food, to go through this financial and political system completely collapsing, he says, on itself, because it's corrupt, it's dark, it's absolutely dark, and it needs to collapse. And what we're going to do on a local level in order to ride through these changes, he says, not on things like that. He says that we can't control. He says, because the Alliance knows this. They're already way ahead of us, but we have got to take care of ourselves. We have got to be unconditionally responsible for ourselves. And that's where our focus needs to be, not worrying about things we cannot control. Exactly. It says, so focus on the things you can control, and this way you don't have to worry about that stuff and be afraid. Okay? He says, for one, it's going to distract you. And number two, it's going to lower your vibration because it's going to hang over you in here. It says, don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about it. Okay? Worry about the things you can control and fix. That's the job. That's the mission right now. That you yourself, your family, your loved ones, he says, just do that. Next question. Lots of solar flares and CME's activity this week, all compounding this weekend. There are geomagnetic storm warnings advising people to stay indoors who have certain health conditions. I understand there's a radiation component to these CMEs, but would love to hear your thoughts. Or are these health alerts made to generate fear of the sun? And Alex says, yes, they are. It's all to generate fear. It's exactly what it is. He says that's exactly what it is. The sun is going through a helium conversion. It's evolving. It's evolving. Says, so let's be afraid of that because it's evolving. What have I said in my past videos? We need to evolve, not revolve. Revolve is a wheel, it just goes around and around. We are evolving. So he just said the sun is evolving. It is coming up and out. Okay? Moving on to brighter things. He says it's light. Says it becomes our light. Its light passes through all living things on the planet. So be afraid. He says, ladies and gentlemen, whatever the system tells you, believe the opposite. He says, I've been saying this for years. Believe the opposite. If you look at nature, he says, nature always knows ahead of time. Says that there's going to be earth changes. Are the birds still flying? Are the squirrels still doing their thing? Are they still playing? Are they gathering nuts? Are they doing what they do? Are the rabbits still in your yard? Okay, he says, are they acting natural? Is nature being nature? When you don't see any nature, then you should have cause to be worried. But as long as you see nature around you being nature, then you know what they're telling you is bullshit. It says, because nature always knows. They always know ahead of us, okay? Always. He's right. Look to nature. I have noticed like the Canadian geese have been coming back south, uh, but they're not flying in a V formation like they normally do, and they're not honking as much. Like I saw a line the other night, and they were in a straight line, just following each other. There was no V, which I've never really seen that before. And then there was one lonely one that was flying all by itself, and I was like, that's kind of odd. So yeah, maybe they're just all out of whack. Uh, I'll tell you, with the magnetic field. He says that's how farmers know when a storm is coming. They watch their cattle, they watch their horses. He says they will go to a specific place where they're going to be okay and be protected from the storm because they know. He says, see, we've been so apart from nature that we have come to depend on our information from sources that have been working against us. He says, from fucking day one. So he says, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. He says, I love and appreciate you. Thank you for supporting myself, James and JP, and all that you do. I do appreciate you. Thank you so much. We will see you next Friday. God bless. Be safe. And don't get down. He says, don't get down. He says, a lot of really good things are happening, even if you don't hear about it. Okay? So that's the end. There were several other questions. Like I said, it's always because it's either stuff he's mentioned before or it's stuff like I just feel like it's not really relevant to bring up. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed that. I got a few things out of that I didn't know. But anyway, I am headed out of town tomorrow morning overnight. We're gonna head up to northern Idaho and spend a night. So I am so excited because I get to be in nature, and I'm just so excited to get to leave my town after a couple years. I'm like, that's it. We're going. I gotta get in nature. I gotta be near water, near nature, and all that stuff. So me and my daughter are headed out of town and I just can't wait. I'm so excited. So hopefully I can take some pictures. Maybe I'll show it. I don't know. We'll see. My phone takes horrible pictures, so I need a new one. It's like 6 years old and I haven't upgraded it. So I'm not too great with technology, as you can tell. Um, anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you like this, hit the like button, share this with anybody you think you might enjoy this with. I just like being able to communicate with all of my family out there, seeing and hearing your comments. Thank you for all the lovely comments and thank you for the emails. I have not been in there to look at them in the past probably a month now, and I keep saying I'm going to, and I just haven't had the time. So I apologize for that, but thank you for all the lovely comments and the emails. I do appreciate it. We all need to connect with each other. We're all human. We're all going through the same shit, you know? So I love all you guys. I appreciate you. And Um, as my bracelet says in Battlestar Galactica, so say we all. Where we go one, we go all. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time. I love you. I want to give you all a great big hug. Bye. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.